Okay, we're live, but I'm still not seeing Joe.
It should have secondary thoughts in there.
Okay. So 2 viewers, is that mean there's 2 people on there right now?
I'm going to send it to your other email, I guess. Send you another invitation. Oh, so I'm in the Hangout.
Do you want me to just start talking?
No, it'll be all right.
Okay. We should be getting started here in just a moment. We're just about work through some technical challenge.
All right, resend it. There you go. No, I sent that. You just got the call. I just sent it to your Gmail account again. And I heard it ringing. So you're in it, right? I'm just not seeing you, Tracy. I'm sorry. Well, we're going to get started, and we'll continue to try to see you there, okay? And that's okay. I might give you a ring back here in a second. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to begin. Welcome to Green Biz Wichita's presentation of Wichita's water future. Mark Chamberlain. We are broadcasting live by way of Google Hangouts on air right now. And so you'll be able to watch this presentation later on YouTube. And also we extended our audience just a little bit. So I want to introduce Dixie Larson, who's the chairperson of the Green Biz Executive Committee, and she'll introduce our program for today. He's not fine. He's in the hangout. He's just not getting sleep.
All right. So is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming and spending your time with us today. Happy that Mark is going to show this presentation over Google Live. Excited about that. And we have Joe Pajor, who's a Deputy Director of Public Works at the Utilities for the City of Wichita. Thank you very much, Joe, for coming. Little bit about him. He's been with the city for about 34 years. He was awarded the Excellence in Public Service Award in 2012. That's a high honor, I think, isn't it? Okay, good. He is very, very educated. He has a BA in physics from Benedictine College in Wichita and a master's also in physics from Wichita State University. Go Shockers, right? We also have Terry Streeter, who may be joining us from the Topeka with the Kansas Water Department. And there he is. What's Tracy? Tracy?
Can you hear us, Tracy? He's there. Okay.
Is anybody good at lip reading? So real quickly, we'd just like to go around the room and give our name and if we're with a company. And also, if you could help us with our marketing efforts by telling us how you learned of this event. We used several different mechanisms, so we'd like to track that. Start right over here.
My name is Fred Lusek. I am a professor at University, and I found out through your Facebook.
Okay, good.
My name is Lisa. I found my language notebook. I'm from China. I just found the event.com.
Okay, great, great.
Back in the room.
Can you hear us, Tracy?
Nice.
Can you hear us, Tracy?
Yeah. And don't go to representing construction.
I'm Larry Bennett with KMUW, Wichita Public Radio. I got the newsletter.
Alan Field in the medical field and saw the newspaper.
Okay.
Ben Huey, I'm an environmental scientist and associates. I think it was your email that was forwarded to me from Lisa.
Good, good.
Corey Tillman, Park Board and Stormwater Advisory Board, and I saw it in the newspaper and got an email about it.
So we really pushed it hard for you. Good, good.
I'm Lynn Moore with PDC. I got the email.
Okay.
Tried to set them up with LED source and on the board, so I guess I got my right over.
You have to be here.
I have to be here. I'm Steve Out with PDC, and I got the.
Okay.
I'm Bobby Conner. I'm with Flint Hills National Golf Club and email.
Okay.
Steve Herman with Kennedy & Co. I also sit on the Green Biz Executive Board.
Well, welcome all of you. And are we ready to get started?
Yeah. So, Joe?
This is more technology than I'm used to. I don't know about you guys. First of all, for those of you that were expecting Ben Nelson this morning per the newsletter and probably Facebook too, the District Attorney's Office Consumer Fraud Section has a term for this. It's called bait and switch. Bait was Ben, and I'm the switch. He was on vacation this week. He was going to come in anyway, and he said he was going to have to eat breakfast, and I said, that's okay, Ben, you stay on vacation. So we're going to talk a little bit about water supply planning and a 50-year effort, a 50-year vision that the state of Kansas has dovetails very well. The state is in the process of developing a statewide vision, and from the perspective of the city of Wichita, we're interested in the water supply for our water utility. Our water utility serves about 150,000 customers, a lot more people than that, but 150,000 customers. And in addition to that, we serve 11 different customers at wholesale, and those 11 utilities then serve additional customers at retail. So it really is a regional impact in not only Wichita, but the surrounding area. Have the next slide, Mark. In terms of the importance and understanding the importance of water and water supply, it's kind of a two-sided coin. In a way, water and water supply is an excellent example of infrastructure, and in a sense, in an ideal world, infrastructure is taken care of and it's not something that you need to think about very often or very hard or very long. However, because of the role that water is playing going forward, it is important that we think about water supply and water usage. And we had two community engagement processes, a community survey and ACT ICT, engaged a lot of people about a lot of different topics to determine what was topmost in their mind. And in both of these efforts, water scored very high in terms of something that is of interest and concern to people. Next, Mark. Pretty picture, because every PowerPoint should have some pretty pictures. It's a pretty picture of our water treatment plant located on Museum Boulevard near Cowtown. I can't give you any more specifics for security reasons, even though we're live to the world. Next, Mark. This is where we get our water supply from today. Historically, we used primarily groundwater, but for the last 14 years, we've been emphasizing Cheney, our surface water supply. So about 60% from Cheney, 40% from Equus beds. Most everybody knows where Cheney Reservoir is, 25 miles west of Wichita. About 25 miles northeast of Wichita is the Equus beds groundwater resource that it covers a number of different counties, but our well field is basically primarily in Sedgwick and Harvey counties. Next. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about drought, and the reason for that is, number one, it's been in the news the last couple of years, and then last summer we had rather a miraculous rain event. We estimate the frequency of the rain event that we had last summer that took us from a very low lake level to above normal lake levels happens sometime every 500 to 600 years. So literally it's been 500 years statistically since the last time we saw a rain event like that. I'm on a cruise in Alaska, and in the cruise, one of the beauties is you don't get cell phone coverage unless you pay for it in addition, which I didn't. So we're out on the ocean. Every time we pull into a port, the phones start lighting up with all of these warnings and watches for all of the rain events and the flood events. At the third port we went into, I turned to my wife and I said, I think Mike Maida, who's our IT director, is just messing with my phone because he doesn't want me to worry about the drought, so he's simulating that there's this amazing rainfall event that ends the drought. Let's talk about ends the drought for a second, though. In the drought of the 1950s and in the drought of the 1930s, after two very dry years in both cases, there was a wetter than normal year. And that's about where we are in terms of the last couple of years that we went through. So it remains to be seen whether we're in a drought or out of a drought. Droughts are kind of like economic conditions. It's only after the fact that you can really figure out when they started and when they actually ended. I want to talk a little bit here about our drought response plan. Our drought response plan is designed to have specific trigger levels for actions to be taken. One of the challenges the last couple of years when we were going into drought conditions and Cheney Reservoir's level was going down and down was in that crisis situation, it's very hard to formulate and implement a plan. So now there is a plan with triggers tied to the 12-month rolling average of the water elevation in Cheney Reservoir. And if that elevation drops, then these triggers would occur automatically, and the city manager is authorized by the council that adopted a drought response policy to implement these measures. Stage one is just voluntary conservation, and that's 70 to 90% trigger. If the level gets below 90%, we go into phase one. Phase one would be from 70% to 90%. This morning, we're at 104%, okay? Good news, we did the extra credit, we got over 100%. The way you get over 100% in a water supply is above our water supply in Cheney Reservoir is a flood control storage, so we're actually up into the bottom of that flood control storage. If the water level drops, you can see what happens. We have outdoor watering 1 day per week at level 2. Level 3, all outdoor watering is banned, with the exceptions that are shown there for gardens and businesses that directly rely upon irrigation for their business needs. Good example of how this doesn't apply is Quick Trip. Quick Trip doesn't have to water their lawn daily in order to operate their business. If you're Flint Hills National or any golf course, soccer fields, those types of activities, nurseries, they would still have the ability to get to the water. And then below 35%, watering, all outdoor watering would be banned, and 15% of your indoor usage would have to be reduced. And the only exceptions at that point are hospitals, major hospitals. Okay. So at that, when you get to that level, we start losing significant community assets. Yes, sir. At this point, it's just major hospitals. This is a very bad situation to get to. Okay, so next slide. Oh, that's it. We have a 1% design drought that we designed to, and this is basically equivalent of the drought of the 1930s. And in our present condition, with no new water supply, this shows you how long we would be in a 1% drought in each of those different stages of drought response plan. It's a lot of time in a bad place. And then the next slide shows if we do add a new supply. Well, if we add a new supply and we go to this 1% drought, which is a 1% probability of it occurring in any given year, then we still end up in our drought response plan, but only in stages 1 and 2. Not nearly as dire as without the water supply. Next. We started out with a long list of about 20 different alternatives for water supply, and we whittled that down and whittled it down, and it's now down to 2 options. And those 2 options are still under investigation and negotiation. And the first one deals with our aquifer storage and recovery system, and the second one is the El Dorado Reservoir. In the El Dorado Reservoir, you'll see in a minute, we've got 3 different options for bringing finished treated water from El Dorado into the Wichita distribution system and then distributing it. Next. Lots of numbers here, but money is important, and that's what this covers. This shows the total cost through 2060 of a number of different water supply options. And if you look at the first column of numbers, the 3 different El Dorado options are shown there, and the ASR improvements. I'll just briefly describe what these involve. The first El Dorado option is building a 30 million gallon per day water treatment plant in El Dorado, bringing that water over to Wichita. The second one is the same idea, but at a smaller scale, 10 million gallon per day capacity plant. The third one is one in which we build the 30 million gallon per day, but we don't always use it at that level. Okay. So those are the 3 options that are evaluated there with their life cycle cost. And the ASR option is to take our existing aquifer storage and recovery system, which takes excess flows from the Little Ark River, cleans that water up, and injects it into the ground to make additional improvements to make that project able to produce more water than it can today. And that's going to involve additional injection wells, some additional pipeline construction, as well as creation of a small reservoir next to the river, because in high flow events, there's more water going past our intake than we can treat in terms of the capacity of our treatment plant. So that reservoir would let us store some of that excess water. Then as the waters recede and there's no longer water in the river, we still have water available in the reservoir to continue treatment. Okay. Yes, sir.
Why do we want to send finished water from El Dorado to Wichita? Why can't you just bring raw water over and treat it here?
We could do that, and that's one of the options we looked at. We looked at bringing raw water over, treating it in our treatment plant. We looked at taking raw water up to the ASR project. Those were evaluated. They weren't as attractive as this, in part because if you do the finished water, you can bring it to the east side of our distribution system, and you don't have to take it all the way downtown or all the way up to ASR. Okay? Good questions. This chart's also important because it shows for a 1% drought the amounts of water conservation that we need to achieve year in and year out. So this water supply plan is different than historic water supply plans, because historically what utilities did is they figured out what the demand was going to be, they figured out how to meet that, and that was the end of the story. At this point, in this engagement and going forward, we're really talking about working in a partnership with our customers to both conserve water as well as fund additional water supplies. Next slide shows what happens if the City Council decides to have a local option sales tax and commits some of that money to the cost of the new water supply. At this point, the Council's considered this water supply along with transit system support, along with economic development support, and along with street maintenance as 4 items that a sales tax might be used for. When you compare these slides side by side, you can see that there's a considerable reduction in the rate impacts for water supply if we commit a portion of the sales tax revenue from a 5-year sales tax to paying for the water supply. Next, let's talk water conservation. By the way, anybody recognize this picture? Anybody know where that picture's from? Okay. Ben, where's it from? Water Center, right. Down in Herman Hill Park, cleans up the groundwater from underneath the central part of Wichita. This is really a wonderful facility if you've never been there. For a lot of Wichitans, Herman Hill Park is only famous for the Herman Hill riots, right. One bad day and you're scarred for life. But the fact is that that was the logical place for us to put the treatment plant because the water was collected through wells in the central part of the city, treated at that plant, and then released into the river. Originally, it was discussed to have a small metal building with all of the treatment works inside of it. Instead, the city manager at that time, Chris Churches, had a vision in which we would actually celebrate the fact that we were cleaning up the groundwater and we would increase the visibility of water supply, and water issues by actually creating a museum and a visitor center so that people could come and tour the treatment works and understand the role of water in our lives. Okay, next slide, please. Last year, we put our toe into the water for the first time into a rebate program, and we offered rebates to incentivize people to buy high water efficiency appliances and rain barrels. And we had a pretty good response to that program. It only operated for a part of the year. And we had, you can see the numbers there, 3,808 different devices, rain barrels, high efficiency washers, clothes washers, dishwashers, toilets. Okay, so next, one more slide. This is the breakdown of what people decided to buy with that rebate program. Toilets topped the list, being the most popular. Dishwashers and washing machines in second and third place, and rain barrels in third place. Rain barrels are kind of interesting because in some parts of the western U.S., you can't use a rain barrel, but a rain barrel is basically to catch stormwater runoff from your rooftop and save that water for use on your property. Well, there are some parts of the country where all of that rainwater is spoken for, and it would be illegal to deploy a rain barrel, but makes great sense in Wichita. And that real thin slice is smart irrigation controllers. This is the irrigation controller to overcome the natural tendency of many people when they buy an irrigation system, which is convenience. So the reason it's convenient is you don't have to think about it. The reason it's convenient is you pick when it rains and it doesn't interfere with any outdoor activities you're going to have at your home. The problem is, of course, it waters for the worst case situation. Smart irrigation controllers are actually devices to look at climate conditions, to look at how much rain we've had, to look at how much sun we've had, to look at how much Kansas wind we've had, and decide whether or not and for how long to run your irrigation system. Not very popular, but I think they're going to increase in popularity because they do create the convenience of the irrigation system, but you don't have to worry about taking expensive water and using it to wash the gutter. Next, 2014 program. We're expanding. We got all the items from last year, and this year we're including rain sensors. Rain sensors, well, if you're an iPhone fan, rain sensors are kind of like an Android phone. It's better than nothing, but it isn't as good as an iPhone. So it's not as smart as the smart irrigation controllers, but at least it deals with the number one problem, which is it rained yesterday and or it's raining right now, and yet the irrigation system is running. It'll keep that from happening. High efficiency urinals, self-explanatory, I hope. Dual flush conversion kits. That sounds kind of a good breakfast topic, isn't it? Well, this is where you have a flush controller that can flush number 1 or number 2 as appropriate to the load that you have placed on your device. Leave it at that. I don't know. It's a brand new program. They are becoming more common. Yeah. But the nice thing is that you can buy them as retrofit kits. So if you like everything about your toilet except for the fact that it flushes under worst case conditions, you can now address that. I have to be kind of careful what I say, thinking about this living forever in the world of YouTube. Program details. Next. Okay. A couple of things I think people are going to like. Number 1 is our last rebate program ended on December 31st. This program is going to start July 1st, but it's going to be retroactive for purchases made since January 1st of this year. So if you bought any of last year's items on last year's list, or any of those plus the ones that are available in this year's program, you'll be able to get the rebate. Now, one could argue, well, why would you do that after people have already spent their money? And the reason is because a $100 benefit credit on your bill is something you're probably going to tell somebody else about. And so there's a good marketing aspect to this. You can have up to 5 items, even if you had items last year. So you can get 5 different rebates for 5 different purchases. Everybody with a Wichita water bill is eligible. Last year it was homeowners only. And this actually is going to be funded over with the half of the money that we allocated last summer that we didn't spend last summer on the rebate program. Okay? Next slide, Mark. And this just shows what last year's program saved in terms of a percentage basis. And what makes this number important, these percentage numbers, they're modest percentages. But in that water supply plan slide that we looked at, there was a conservation percentage that we had to save each year during the next 50 years. So it's very important that this is going to have to be ongoing and institutionalized, because we have to keep achieving this additional fraction of a percent of load reduction through conservation measures. You can see we didn't set the 2014 target too high. Okay, next, conclusions. Favorite slide for most audiences. I think that you've seen that we are looking at, we've not finalized yet our water supply plan for the next 50 years, and we also haven't finalized how we're going to pay for it. And that's really a part of the city council's perspective and the city manager's directive on community engagement. Again, historically, staff would have worked out all the bugs and the details, and we would have come to the public and announced what our plans were for our community and its future water supply. This approach is much more interactive, it's much more iterative, and it really, from a staff point of view, feels kind of like, well, we're bringing out ideas that are half-baked. We don't have final numbers yet. We're still in negotiations with El Dorado about how much they're going to charge us for water if we buy the water from them, how much the plant's going to cost, how much the pipeline's going to cost. We're still working on the design for the improvements that we make at our aquifer storage and recovery system. We have preliminary numbers, and those numbers are getting better every month. Referendum on the ballot this fall, and this is one of the sources that money could be used for if a 5-year 1% sales tax is approved by the voters. If the sales tax is not approved by the voters, obviously from a water supply plan, we still need to make sure that we've got a water supply. So that's why we wanted to present the information to you of the rate impacts with and without that sales tax funding alternative. What's next, Mark? Okay, it's been wonderful being the warm-up act for Tracy Streeter. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Tracy Streeter.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? Well, good morning, everyone. I'm kind of regretting doing this from Topeka. I wished I would have enjoyed a drive down the turnpike through the Flint Hills this morning to be with you in person, but I do appreciate getting a little bit of Joe's humor every time we meet and participate in an event together. He's a great warm-up guy. In fact, I think it should maybe be the other way around. But as Joe indicated, Wichita's work that they've done on their 50-year water supply plan does dovetail very nicely into the work that we're doing at the state level. And just to revisit a little bit with you on what we've been doing since last October, when the governor charged us with going out and talking to Kansans and come up with some ideas on what we want our water supply future to look like in 50 years, it became very apparent as at that time we were in the throes of drought, as Joe indicated, and things looked very stark in Wichita with the levels at Cheney Lake being very low and declining aquifer in the Equus So we knew that Wichita was going to be taking certainly the lead on your 50-year water supply future, but we wanted to make sure that the policies and activities in Topeka were very complementary and supportive of whatever our state's largest city was doing. I guess to really dial into some of the things we've been hearing in your part of the state and around the state is conservation is got to be the cornerstone of everything that we do. We do have opportunities to develop and enhance water supplies, and Joe's laid out some very creative ideas that they're working on, but behind the scenes you've got to have a good conservation program, because sometimes at the end of the day that's all you got is the ability to curb your demand. And we don't know. I think I like Joe's comment that he said it's kind of like economics. You don't know when things start and when they stop with drought, and that's his analogy to economics is very true. So, we do have history that we look at and try to predict what the future might look like, but quite frankly, that's an open question. Joe was talking about 1% drought, 2% drought. Those are planning thresholds that we work on in water planning, but those are just projections. And I fear for the day when we do see a 1% drought or worse. And so far, it's always rained. It's always bailed us out, but there will come a day when it won't. And so that's why we have to think worst case scenario in a lot of our water supply plans. Regionalization is probably the hottest topic in your part of the state in terms of having a supply that will meet not just Wichita's needs, but everyone's needs. When you look at the customers that Wichita has, there's a number of communities outside the city limits of Wichita that rely on Wichita for a water supply. We're very excited about the potential partnership with the city of El Dorado and utilizing that resource. There's water that's future use storage in El Dorado Lake that is there for this very reason, to meet the regional water supply needs. And El Dorado has control of that, but we're very, very pleased that there's conversations going on between the two communities to see if we can figure out how much, at what cost, can we utilize El Dorado Lake in more of a regional setting where we have connections between the two water supplies. The thing that really drove the governor's vision was the Ogallala Aquifer, which is, of course, west of you, and reservoir sedimentation. The good news is, even though Cheney got low last summer, it's in very good shape from a sedimentation rate standpoint. I believe it's only 7% filled with sediment. And so really there's no burning need to go out and start dredging Cheney Reservoir, because there's not a lot to be gained by doing that. That said, we want to certainly be supportive and complimentary of anything the Wichita city wants to do in terms of maximizing Cheney storage. They're doing a good job now. As Joe indicated, they're at 102 or 104% of capacity, and that's the name of the game, and is to store water when you have plenty. And so I know they've been working with the Corps of Engineers to try to make sure that we can take advantage of those surpluses when we have them and save them for future use. The Equus beds is a bit different than the Ogallala, where the Ogallala is we're in a mining situation out there. We're taking out of the ground much more water than we can put in with recharge. That's not the case in the Equus beds, but we seem to be teetering on sustainability. Are we taking out more than we put in? And some years we do. And so I think one of the things that the state's interested in doing as part of this vision, and we'll see when it finally comes out in final form, but working with the Equispeds, Groundwater Management District, City of Wichita, and other Equispeds users to make sure that we have policies and we're utilizing water in such a way that is sustainable. And certainly with Wichita's well field in the middle of the Equispeds, a primary player in that. We have chloride contamination in the Equispeds that we're going to have to deal with or accept. And right now, I'd like to see a scenario where we try to come up with some creative technologies where we can possibly reclaim that water and use it rather than just accept it as a given in our freshwater supplies. So between the reservoirs and the Equispeds, those are our primary focus down that way. And I really do think that what the City of Wichita is doing right now is very complementary to what I'm envisioning will come out in this 50-year water vision for South Central Kansas and for the Wichita region. The last thing I would say, and I think maybe there's a slide here that Mark may put up, is we have some public meetings coming up here starting July the 7th, and our first one is in Wichita. It's at the Sedgwick County Extension Center. It starts at 11:30 in the morning on Monday, July 7th. That'll be the first of 12 public meetings where we take the first draft of the water vision around the state and get feedback from everyone. So far, we've met with about 150 different organizations and got input into the vision. Now we're going to take it public. And so these are designed for the general public. We encourage everyone to participate. Around July 1st, we will be releasing the first draft of the vision on our website so that folks can look at it for about a week before we start the public meeting tour. So if Mark shows you the slides that contain all the public meeting tours, you'll see the other 11 locations. If you're in Wichita, I'm sure you'll utilize the one there at the Extension Center, but you'll see there's 11 other events that week that you can participate in. And if you don't end up seeing the slides here today at this meeting, you can go to our website at kwo.org and see those slides. I see them coming out now on the screen. So really that's all I have to add this morning. I don't have any good jokes to complement what Joe provided you this morning, so I'll just leave it at that. I'll try to answer some questions. A little hard for me to hear those of you in the audience, but I could hear Joe loud and clear, but those of you that were asking questions, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
So if you have a question, you just ask it to Joe, and then Joe can repeat it into the microphone.
I'll alter the question so they're easier for you to answer, Stacy.
Tracy, Joe, not Stacy.
See, I've shown off now, that's all. Thanks, Tracy.
Sure, Jim.
Ben. See, all I got to do is set him up.
John, I'll ask you, John, and I'll send it over to Stacy. Actually, looking at the Equispeds, and you mentioned, of course, regionalizing the question, it seems to me that we need to bring all of the stakeholders to the table in funding ASR. Wichita's been bearing the burden, and Wichita has shown that it works. It would seem that if we did a complete regional funding and operation of recharge throughout the Equispeds, we could have a lot more impact on the resource, not just for Wichita, but for all of the other users of the Equispeds. Wichita is simply one user. Also, I wonder with the chloride contamination, might there be a liability issue that we could also tap, shall we say, for funding, because that chloride came from somewhere, referring, I think it's the Burton oil or Burton salt plume. But bring the state water office together with the Equispeds Management District and bring all stakeholders to the table to help restore the Equispeds rather than Wichita restoring the Equispeds.
Tracy, embedded in Dr. Huey's editorial was a question dealing with the regional aspects of the Equispeds, both as a water supply and in terms of addressing the salt contamination issues and the possibility of a more regional or state-based approach to supporting the ASR project.
Well, I think that's kind of where we need to head. We've sort of done that already with the efforts of the Wichita ASR project. The City of Wichita did come to the Kansas Water Authority and suggest that there were some regional implications, and it was beyond the City of Wichita's responsibility to take care of the Equispeds in its entirety. And we certainly would own up to that there is a broader stakeholder group that's stands to benefit from aquifer storage and recovery and from any sort of cleanup efforts. So I don't have the answers to that, but I think you're spot on that needs to be part of the dialogue in a regional setting, is to bring the groundwater district together, the ag users, the other communities that would benefit from any sort of activity to sustain and clean up the equus beds where we have contamination, and look for kind of a broader base of support for that. So I think that's fair game, and I think it's a great comment and question.
So I have two questions related to petroleum exploration. One has to do with what kind of demand does hydraulic fracturing put on our current water supply? How significant is it? Is it a big issue, a small issue, whatever? And then the second question has to do with disposal of co-production water. And does that pose any threat to the freshwater aquifers, either the Ogallala or the Equus beds?
Okay, Tracy, I'm going to boost this to you. It's a two-part question. The first deals with the demand that fracking is creating in terms of a water supply issue, and the second question deals with the production water, the produced water, and its disposal relative to the potential for contamination of freshwater resources.
Okay, both good questions, both relevant. As far as demand, quite frankly, the fracking activities in Kansas never reached a level where I considered them to be a huge demand. If you look at the the numbers vary, but you can look at the 10 to 15 acre feet of water to frack a well, which it represents maybe 10% of a typical irrigation system. So on an individual well by well basis, it's really a pretty insignificant amount of water. That said, when we were in the drought and where the fracking was occurring, which was down in Harper and Sumner County and Comanche County, Barber County, that area, they don't have groundwater resources and they don't have a lot of storage. So stream flows were dwindling, and so the oil companies were having to get very creative with finding water. In fact, at the end of the drought there, they were trucking water in. So that can be in a case-by-case basis an issue. But overall, water use for fracking is actually rather minuscule when you compare it to irrigation or even to some significant municipal use. The thing that I liked about what was going on with that, though, is the oil companies were looking at recycling the produced water and reusing that. And I think that's something I can almost assure you we'll be interested in looking at with more detail in this vision process, is seeking those opportunities to recycle that water rather than just dispose of it underground, which is the second part of the question. Let's clean it up and use it. And when Shell still had a presence in Kansas with their leases, they were looking very seriously at developing a fairly substantial recycling facility for their horizontal wells so that they could bring that produced water in, clean it up, and use it in the process. And it's getting to be very common in Oklahoma, as I understand. So I think that's a water resource that we need to take advantage of. Of course, it's not cheap to clean it up, but if the economics are right, that will be a dandy source of water in the oil and gas field and maybe in some other uses. Now, to the contamination part, that was a concern early in the hydraulic fracturing process. The Kansas Geological Survey looked at some of the train wrecks that occurred in other parts of the country and what we were doing in Kansas, and concluded that we were disposing of that produced water and the stuff that was in it at in a geologic formation that was well below any of our freshwater aquifers and posed no threat to contaminating our freshwater supplies. That's just from a standpoint of storage. Now, of course, there can always be accidents and pipe leaks and whatnot that could cause some isolated problems, but just the storage part of it, as far as safely putting it underground, the geologists that were looking at this very closely concluded that it was so far below our freshwater supplies it was not a threat.
I'll just throw in one other thing. One of the things that the fracking water demand did do is it began to demonstrate for us in a very concrete way the value of water. And when these companies were wanting water in order to be able to do their fracking operations, they entered into agreements to lease or use on a short-term basis water rights that were held by others, and that begins to price water at a price that reflects its economic value.
Yeah.
Other questions?
How's the Ogallala aquifer, how is it recharged?
How is the Ogallala aquifer recharged, Tracy?
Just like all of them, we don't get a lot of surface flow into Kansas, particularly along the Ark River or any of them for that matter. So we have to rely on pretty much local precipitation. We do get some alluvial. There is some flow in the Ark River, which gives us some recharge in those alluvial wells and maybe some connected formations off the Ark when we get flows from Colorado. But beyond that, it's merely precipitation. And what we see is we get, these numbers can vary again depending upon where you're at, but we get about an inch of recharge on average per year, and certainly take out much more than that.
Joe, that brings up a point. Where are we at with the state of Kansas on water rights between Kansas, Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska right now, and where are those cases?
Okay, Tracy, the question is the current status of the compact and litigation between Kansas and Colorado and Kansas and Nebraska relative to water resources.
Okay. Colorado and Kansas on the Ark River, there was, a settlement or some closure to that Supreme Court case back in around 2006-07. The state saw a pretty sizable payment from the state of Colorado for damages. The state of Kansas continues to monitor the activities in Colorado and make sure that they are in compliance with that compact. And so we do spend some resources to have some staff that kind of monitor those activities in Colorado. We are concerned, and this isn't necessarily directly compact related, but we are concerned with some of the elevated contaminants that are coming across in some of those state line flows to the point where cities like Lake and Garden City have had to go to reverse osmosis. But again, it's arguable whether the compact can actually deal with that. It was more of a water supply, but there is some terms used in that called reliable, usable, and whatnot. But so from the standpoint right now, we're in a monitoring and enforcement kind of mode with Colorado on the Ark. On the Republican, we are in that compact with Colorado and Nebraska. And basically we're waiting on a Supreme Court decision as far as Nebraska goes in terms of their noncompliance with the what was called the final settlement stipulation back in 2002. We've made some claims that they did not hold up their end of the deal, and we're waiting on a ruling on that. There have been a number of arbitration cases that are closed now relative to some augmentation pipelines that have been proposed both in Colorado and Nebraska, and we're kind of in a kind of a dead spot right now. We're waiting on some judgment from the Supreme Court on the first part with Nebraska, and then we've got some arbitration that could head to litigation on those other topics. Colorado was just recently given a 1-year approval to augment water. They bought some water rights, some irrigation rights in northeast Colorado out of the Ogallala, put them in a pipeline, and they're putting them in the North Fork of the Republican River to help meet compliance concerns just north of the Kansas state line. And that was on a 1-year basis, and I'm sure they would like to see that continue. Nebraska has a couple of augmentation efforts, one major one that puts water in the Republican for our use, but we're still in disputing, and that was one of the arbitration cases on where that water was located and actually how much water would we actually see at the state line from that augmentation pipeline. So those are still kind of up in the air, and we continue to have conversations with our neighbors to the west and north on the Republican, and we await the Supreme Court's decision.
I told Dixie and Mark I'd miss as much of the city council meeting as you guys had questions for, but I trust that one of you will give me the hook when we need to make a wrap up. But other questions at this point? Steve?
The comment was made that conservation is key. I'm curious about residential landscaping. Whether the city ever adopt any regulations, xeriscaping, or how do you deal with people that have their own wells for lands for irrigation? I mean, is there any control there, any potential controls there that would help with our water supply?
Tracy, this question's so easy it's for me, so I'll take it. Yes, I'll repeat the question. What about residential landscaping and the great demand that it creates for water supply in terms of either xeriscaping, which is low water demand landscaping, or other measures that we might take to curb or control water usage? I'll tell you, and then also the related question of driving people to wells. I'll tell you, number one, I think the first thing we've got to do is we've got to address the waste of water. We have water that is being simply wasted. The second thing we need to address is a kind of systemic problem. If you will put 2, 3, even 4 times as much water as your lawn needs, you will get a wonderful result. But with 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, much less of that water, you'll get the same wonderful result. But it's difficult when people pour a lot of fertilizer and water onto a lawn and get a great result, not to believe what their father and forefathers taught them, which is you got to really do this in order to get a wonderful result. And then the next problem is that we have a lot of our city that has the largest lawns with the greatest irrigation system and water usage tend to be in the areas with restrictive covenants that oftentimes have a contractual private relationship between each homeowner and a homeowners association that requires cool season grasses, which are not native to this part of the country, that take a lot of water either from a well or from the utility in order to keep alive. Another disadvantage of overwatering is when you're overwatering a turf lawn, the root system does not go deep. It stays very shallow, and if you have an irrigation head go out for a couple of days in July, you'll end up with a big brown spot because there's no root system to sustain the turf. We've got to address those issues. Relative to water wells, there's no question that part of the reason that our water demand for the last 10 years has been flat in Wichita is a number of different factors, but one of those factors is the fact that there have been thousands and thousands of wells drilled to irrigate lawns with. And that our water rates incentivize that. Every time we increase the water rates, there's more incentive to go out and drill a well. Drilling a well is okay from the city's perspective in that it does help us with our demand management going into the future. That's a good thing. But we have to remember that there are also several thousand customers in Wichita, residences in Wichita, that rely on that alluvium groundwater for 100% of their domestic needs. And if lawn watering draws those wells down, as we've already seen on the east side of town where the groundwater resource is less reliable and less widespread, you can end up with people that are out of water. And then we're doing emergency projects to extend water supply to get to them. On the west side of town, we've seen an issue of groundwater contamination from dry cleaner operations that we're working on this summer to get people hooked up to water that weren't hooked up to water before. So the water well issue goes a couple of different directions real quick. Yes, sir.
I would follow up on this gentleman's question. Leads right into, have there been discussions on 2 points, maybe going a little further on new development construction and maybe requiring strictly underground watering systems, like for example, an adequate system, almost underground irrigation.
Right.
Secondly, what does the city look at as far as converting all of their properties to some type of, a water conservation type of system instead of above ground, maybe to a below ground. Studies have shown it saves about 50% of water from waste and evaporation.
Right. The question deals first with new developments and the possibility of requiring underground irrigation systems for them. And the second question deals with the city of Wichita and our properties and the cool season grasses that we have on a lot of areas. Relative to the first question, an ancillary part of that is the city council could create an ordinance that going forward would keep restrictive covenants from dictating cool season grasses. That's a possibility. That's obviously a policy issue, an important policy issue for the council. Relative to the types of irrigation systems, we have not had those discussions yet. Okay. On the city part of turf grass, I want to break that into two pieces. One is what the park department is responsible for, which is the parks and the recreational ball fields that are public, or recreational fields that are publicly owned. And then the second is all the right-of-way that the City of Wichita Public Works and Utilities is largely responsible for the design and the operation of the landscaping on those areas. Park department will have to speak to parks plans, but I know that Park has spent a lot of money and time trying to make their irrigation systems intelligent and make them so that they can be centrally controlled, even to be able to further reduce the amount of water that's being used for those operations. Park is also working very hard on trying to figure out the true evapotranspiration needs of the turf grass and make sure that they're not overwatering. Because as I said earlier, overwatering does not look like a mistake unless it's done to an extreme. Relative to the right-of-way issue and medians and the street right-of-way adjacent to road projects, the City of Wichita Public Works and Utilities has changed our landscaping design on all public street projects. A couple of years ago, we started the process. It's now fully completed. And so the grass species and the trees and the location of trees and bushes relative to turf has been revised to reduce or eliminate the need for irrigation. There is a problem, and the problem is that at some point in a street right-of-way, either at the sidewalk, if there's a sidewalk there, or at that right-of-way line, you end up with what the city controls versus what the private adjacent property owner controls. And we're still wrestling with, especially when you don't have a sidewalk as a demarcation, you've got a warm season grass that is green but is a lime green, a very mild green compared to the intense emerald green. And if you don't have a sidewalk there, you have an ownership line that defines two different types of turf grass. And the only way to make a warm season grass look worse than it does to some people's eye anyway is to put it right against the cool season Kentucky bluegrass and say success, failure. So we're still wrestling with that issue, but and this is driven out of a need not only for water conservation, but just the maintenance impact of maintaining all of that livescape throughout the city. One and then two.
Follow up on the concern about irrigation and new developments.
Mm-hmm.
Has any consideration been given to the EPA's water sense program, which also gets into water using appliances in the house, requiring the builder to put those in and actually test to see that they work and that the plumbing actually doesn't leak in a house?
You mean kind of a plumbing version?
Energy Star certification, I run that test,
Yep.
I find leaks in new houses.
Okay.
Inside the house.
We have not talked about requiring testing, and obviously testing can be done. I know you're well familiar with the blower door testing for air leakage of the envelope itself. There's the equivalent of that for the other systems that are in a home. We have not talked about that. The Water Sense program of EPA is exactly what our rebate program is designed for. I mean, you can buy a code compliant toilet that is not eligible for the rebate. So you have to be careful when you're looking at buying these appliances that you go to our website, you get the list that we have there, which is the EPA Water Sense list, so that you know that the particular appliance that you're buying is eligible, because before you're going to get the rebate, we're going to check what you submit against that list. So we are using the EPA's WaterWise requirement for the appliance rebate program. Ben?
Joe, you mentioned, of course, all the private wells that have been drilled, especially in east side, west side. We live on the west side, of course. Goddard has their municipal supply well near 119th Street.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the legal situation? I assume they have some level of seniority. What's the legal situation if my subdivision all, we all drill wells and we draw down the water so that Goddard loses their water supply?
The question deals with the west side of Wichita, where the irrigation water that a lot of people are drilling wells for could end up in competition because it's in the same water resource as the supply wells for the city of Goddard. First of all, state law does allow for the regulation of water wells that are used for irrigation if those water wells are in competition with the municipal supply. For the city of Wichita, therefore, we do not have the ability to regulate the wells that are in Wichita for groundwater because our source of supply is not here. In theory, Goddard, as an example, has the ability within their water conservation plan to regulate wells that would be impacting the water supply wells that they have, okay? But the regulatory mechanism is not real clear because the threshold for which you need a water right in order to be able to access groundwater doesn't apply on a typical residential scale. You don't need a water right to get that much water out to be able to irrigate private property. And Tracy, I'll turn it over to you to see if there's anything you want to add to that question.
No, the only thing I would add, Joe, is that even though those domestic wells that are pretty common and they don't require actual application for a water right, they do have priority when they're established. And so if, for example, a community's water right has an older priority date and it's being impaired by a group of domestic wells, there is some administrative remedy to that. Typically, it's the other way around. It's when you see a larger water user impair a domestic well. But in this case, where you have large numbers of domestic wells impacting a single water right for a municipality, I suppose I would assume most of these domestic rights that are domestic wells would be junior to Goddard's water right. I don't know that for sure, but assuming that's the case, if that was causing a problem, there would be perhaps some state involvement in that. But I think Joe's right. City of Salina and the City of Hayes and City of Ellis have all looked at trying to curb domestic water use from individual wells when we get into a drought, just for a conservation standpoint. And that's been a challenge administratively and legally. But here of late, the City of Ellis, for sure, just last summer or the summer before, passed an ordinance that did curb domestic wells in and around their well fields. So Joe was pretty accurate in his description of that.
Yes, sir.
Talk again about the water table and domestic wells. Another level of domestic wells that is quite active in the West Wichita area is geothermal for heating and cooling. Where does that fall in terms of water usage with the city of Goddard, watering lawns, providing heat and cool for a home? And second part of that is whether they're using a ground loop or a pump and dump situation.
Okay, Tracy, the questions concerning geothermal use of a water resource for water source heat pumps and the requirements in terms of permit to be able to use that water, and then there's the related question in the permit to dispose if it's a pump and dump system as opposed to a closed loop system. Want to take a shot at that one?
Boy, I am not familiar with any water supply regulations relative to that. That's a new one on me.
Okay, I'll take a shot at it because I will tell you that depending on how much water you're using, you might need a water right in order to do it. You do need a disposal permit in order to put the water back into the aquifer, and that's just to ensure water quality as well, including temperature in the case of a water source heat pump. That is becoming a fairly streamlined process in terms of those systems becoming less uncommon. I won't say that they're common yet, but they're less uncommon. So I don't know that. And then in terms of competition with a municipal water supply well, Tracy alluded to, and it is correct, that the seniority of a water right determines who's got a water right that is more fundamental if you get into an impairment situation. So for the city of Goddard, for example, their water supply wells have been where they've been for, I'm going to say 40 years, and that's just because that's about as far back as I can think about thinking, but long term. And so all of the development in West Wichita, including any geothermal, would have been after the point in time in which those rights were established. So if there is an impairment claim, then the impairment favors the older water right holder.
Thank you very, very much.
We had a question go up right as you were ringing the bell. That's all right. You're on summer break. You should take a few minutes to rest before you think.
Okay, I'm going to preface my question by saying that I graduated high school several years ago. There's a lot that I don't know, but I'm just curious about the outreach and education efforts on the community level about conservation in terms of these rebates available. Because I look around this room and I feel like we're a fairly homogenous group, and we know about these rebates and how important conservation is. But I'm just curious if the Wichita community as a whole knows about this, because conservation is like important to every person, and only makes a difference if everyone wakes up in the morning and decides I'm going to use their water today. So, do you feel like Wichita's making a big enough effort in outreach and education?
Good news, Tracy. The final question is a great chance for each of us to make our closing statements because it's a very appropriate question for the last question. The question deals with public education and outreach in terms of making people specifically in Wichita aware of the rebate program and the need for conservation efforts on an ongoing basis. I'm going to answer that, and then I'll let you have a shot at talking about the role of education relative to the state's perspective on a statewide basis. First thing I'll tell you is the city of Wichita has had a water conservation program, including one full-time person dedicated to water conservation since the late 1970s. And the reason that that position was created and that program exists is at that point in time, we were talking about bringing water from Milford Reservoir, a long pipeline all the way down to Wichita and supplying about 14, 15 communities as well as Wichita's water supply needs. That plan, that idea, that concept for a water supply for Wichita caused or resulted in the passage by the state legislature, the Interbasin Transfer Act. And that Interbasin Transfer Act prohibits the transfer of water from one supply basin to another supply basin unless certain requirements are met. And among those requirements that you have to meet is you have to demonstrate that you have an effective water conservation program to reduce the demands of the receiving location of water before you go to another drainage basin and raid their water. Okay, that Interbasin Transfer Act has never been utilized since it was passed by the legislature, but we actually, as a point of interest, are on the cusp of seeing that done by the city of Hayes, because the city of Hayes has gone outside of the drainage basin that it sits in and bought a ranch along with water rights, and they are working right now at developing a program to move that water from where it is on the ranch to the city of Hayes. Okay, back to your real question about conservation. One of the challenges historically for utilities is when you had a conservation program, it was kind of viewed as an unmarketing program. We're in the business of selling water, not to make money, just to cover our costs, but we're in the business of selling water. And when we sell less water, sometimes you can end up with less revenue, because when people buy less water, they think they should write a smaller check, and they should. But fixed costs sometimes cause rates to be increased because of that. It's very important from the city of Wichita's perspective that going forward, when we look at water conservation, we want that water conservation to hit that sweet spot where it is offsetting the growth and demand that we have from increased population and from increased economic activity in our community. So in other words, we're going to grow our economy without increasing our water demand because conservation is going to offset that. Okay? So from the city of Wichita's point of view, again, the plan that we're developing is going to have a requirement for water conservation our water supplies and our water demand will not be balanced over this 50-year planning period without that conservation being realized. Tracy, you want to take the rap?
I would just go back to that education piece that you talked about in the first part of the question, and tell you that no matter what we were talking about along the vision tour the spring and over the winter, education was talked about at virtually every one of the meetings, and whether it was K-12, higher ed, and even adult education through extension programs and others, the need for that. One thing I can point to in particular as we looked at conservation over the Ogallala primarily is the adoption of technology and providing educational opportunities for irrigators and land users to learn what's out there and how to utilize it. In fact, we've talked a little bit about a concept of having some technology farms where we can apply the state-of-the-art whatever it is, whether it's the latest sprinkler irrigation system, subsurface drip, moisture monitors that you can put in the ground that tell you when the plant and when the soil needs water, and then have it behave accordingly with the irrigation system. So you're going to see education be a pretty strong component in the vision. As a result of all the input that we received, we're going to have something in there that speaks to probably education at every level.
Well, I want to thank Dixie and Mark for inviting Ben Nelson to come talk to you this morning. Anything you like, tell Ben Nelson about. Anything you don't like, talk to me about. It was great to be able to share the podium via virtual reality with Tracy. So.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you for your time. It's very, very informative. Oh, did you get the business cards also? That was very, very informative, and I feel we're all much more educated as a result of both of your discussions. So thank you for that. Again, there are several of you in this room that are not Green Biz Wichita members, and we encourage you to sign up and join our cause. There is a on our website, which is greenbizwichita.org. There it gives the information and the benefits. Just feel free to send us an email or give us a call directly. There's some booklets on the back that you can look at what the Green Biz Wichita is solely for, and that is to educate businesses, and we believe that businesses can do good for each other while at the same time doing good for the environment. So encourage you all to join. I'd really like to thank Mark for his technology. I have no idea how he did all this, but I think it's cool that it's Google Watch, right?
But just go to the Facebook page for Green Biz. You'll see the link to the video if you want to watch the YouTube video again.
Yeah, we had KSN in here who felt that it was a good thing to report on, and Larry and his group, we appreciate your support and educating on public radio. And we're going to go ahead right now and draw 2 names for our famous bottles of wine back there. And I don't know if you have everybody, has everybody put their business card in? And if you don't have one, I have some cards you can fill your name out on if you want.
You can take your name tag and drop it in there if you want.
It's oversized.
Yeah.
Hold it.
Hold it. Oh, this is my business.
Okay.